Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Junkyard Dawgcast. I'm your host, Jordan Hill. Got the whole crew with us, Kipp Adams and Ben Wolk, on this Monday afternoon, recording on Monday again because of a busy week ahead. The Georgia Bulldogs getting ready for the SEC Championship game. Number 7 Bulldogs getting ready to take on number 2 Texas. 4 p.m. Eastern Time in Atlanta's Mercedes-Benz Stadium. Game will be televised on ABC. I believe all three of us will be there in person for that game. So a lot to get into there. Transfer portal talk. National Signing Day is a couple of days away at this point. We'll get into Georgia basketball toward the end. So plenty to discuss on this episode. But first, guys, I want to start with the news from Sunday. Georgia cornerback Julian Humphrey announces his intent to enter the transfer portal. Timing was a little bit surprising, just given the fact that Georgia's got this game against Texas coming up. But I think I speak for all three of us when I say this was not a surprise. Julian was a guy that was a starter for the first 10 games. Daniel Harris bypasses him. He plays against UMass, but doesn't start, and then he doesn't play at all against Georgia Tech. Julian Humphrey, a junior, 10 tackles, 4 pass breakups in 11 games this season. He is looking to leave after toying with going into the portal last year. Ultimately did not. Came back to Georgia. I want to get both of y'all's thoughts on this. Ben, what do you think about the announcement and Julian Humphrey getting ready to leave Georgia?
Well, I think the timing of it is probably what will generate the most attention from this thing. I think I've already noticed a few of his now, I guess, former teammates have made some, probably fair, but also, cryptic, I guess, comments about the decision that Julian made to announce it the way that he did. I think that Kirby Smart's comments suggested that it wasn't something that he was spending too much time and focus on this week with Texas coming up and signing day on Wednesday. I think that he's got bigger matters to attend to at this point in time. From a football standpoint, again, I guess it's surprising that it happened right now, just because I think every coach would prefer that their teams handle it the way that Georgia players tend to handle it when it comes to the transfer portal window opening and when Georgia's season is wrapping up. But he commits that defensive pass interference penalty in, I think it was the first or second drive of the Tennessee game. I think he played 6 snaps in that game. Basically only played garbage time snaps against UMass and then did not play a single snap against Georgia Tech. So clearly Dalen Everett and Daniel Harris have become the 2 starting cornerbacks. This will open a door a little bit for some of the freshmen, Ellis Robinson and DeMello Jones, probably first and second on that list of guys that could emerge. But Georgia traditionally likes to play 2 cornerbacks for every snap. They've deviated a little bit from that over the last 2 years, primarily because I think they were trying to manage certain personalities in that room with Daniel Harris and Julian Humphrey. It wasn't always easy at times to navigate that and, give a fair snap split. And I think that probably just alleviates some of the conversation that has to happen around that as we get into postseason play. So, unfortunate timing probably, but, given some of the past transfer portal experiences, with Humphrey, it's probably not the most surprising either.
Warren Brinson had commented on his social media post, upset about the timing. Malachi Starks, when we talked to him on Monday, said it's crazy timing and did wish Julian the best and whatever comes next. Be interested to see where Julian ends up. He's a guy from Texas, I believe Houston. He talked about back in the spring that part of why he wanted to leave was a chance to go back home. Ultimately, he stayed. He posted on social media, Texas A&M, how loud it was at Kyle Field on Saturday. So we'll see if the Aggies wind up getting involved. Kipp, any thoughts? Yeah, go ahead, Ben.
I just want to jump in real quick since you brought up the comments from Malachi Starks and Warren Brinson. Nitro Tuggle also has a pinned tweet that is ... with a picture of Dalen Everett and Daniel Harris running out of the tunnel. So it's definitely something that I think has been recognized by his teammates.
Kipp, what do you make of this whole situation? And then just, bigger picture, Julian not being on this team going forward.
Well, my initial reaction is the portal doesn't even open for a week. I know that our network has been breaking plans to enter the transfer portal throughout today in the last 48 hours, but none of those were from playoff teams or likely playoff teams that I really was paying attention to. I think Julian could have waited a week, regardless of his playing time, and not missed any opportunities in the transfer portal, and also still kind of paid his still current teammates a little bit of respect and allowed the narrative and the focus to be on a pretty important football game for Georgia instead of himself. At the same time, though, I mean, if he already knows what he's doing, that's the plan. And I think for Georgia right now, you saw a game where there were over 90 defensive snaps, and he didn't get one of them. At the same time, Ellis Robinson and DeMello, they didn't get any snaps either. But I do think this will help them in practice. This week, the coming weeks, they're going to get valuable reps now that Julian may have been getting in practice. He is now given way to them. So in that aspect, getting it done now actually helps Georgia in a way, because these guys are going to get those reps and be better prepared. If not for this postseason, definitely just going into the spring, because every practice rep has value to it. Kirby Smart's always mentioned that. And so it's a big chance for these freshmen to just kind of get more confidence, get more experience, and be better prepared for whenever their moment is called.
Kirby was very complimentary of DeMello Jones, Ellis Robinson, and so was Malachi Starks on Monday, so that bodes well. And I know a lot of people are excited, hoping Ellis Robinson will become more of a factor. They want to see the former 5-star get out there, have a chance to contribute. Obviously, stay glued to Dogs 24/7 these next few weeks with the portal heating up. We will have more there, and we'll keep you in the loop as far as Georgia players leaving, and then any targets that Georgia has in the portal. All right, fellas, let's shift the focus to the big game on Saturday. Longhorns and Bulldogs showing up in Atlanta, and one's going to leave as the SEC champions. Had a chance to hear from Kirby Smart, Malachi Starks, and Carson Beck on Monday getting ready for this game. Kirby very complimentary of this Texas team, talking about their physicality, talked about the job Steve Sarkisian's done. Really harped on how Steve Sarkisian got this program ready to make the SEC jump. I know this is not a surprise to folks who follow the conference, but this is still just their first year in the SEC, and they're playing for the SEC title. Kirby had a lot of really good things to say there. Thought this clip was interesting of Kirby. He was asked, looking at Georgia and Texas, they played, I want to say that was October 19th. What improvement have both teams seen since that game? That's what Kirby had to say.
I don't know how to answer that. It doesn't seem like that long ago that we played them. I guess it was mid-October or so, that we played those guys. And, there are areas that we have played better in, and then areas that we haven't. And it's almost gone both ways in terms of we've had games we played better in certain areas, and then games we didn't play better in certain areas. We offensively, we didn't run the ball real well against these guys. We kind of succeeded off of their mistakes, their turnovers, and we scored points off of their turnovers. But we've played well offensively at times since, and we've played well defensively at times since. But we've also not put a complete game together, and that's probably what we're trying to do best now, is play our best when our best is needed. As far as them, they've improved in a lot of ways. I think defensively they've been at a high level the entire year. That's not, I think offensively they've run the ball. They've committed to running the ball, being really physical. They've had 30 and 40 carries, runs in several games, and a commitment to that and a physicality, while also being able to throw the ball really efficiently. They've got the weapons to do both.
I want to get y'all's opinion on the Texas part of this. I imagine that all three of us watched that 17-7 win over Texas A&M on Saturday night. What impresses you guys most with Texas as far as maybe what they've gotten better at since Georgia played them? And I'll start and say the way they've run the ball, I don't think I really realized then that they were capable of this. I mean, Quintrevion Wisner, career high 186 yards in that game against A&M, and they've been moving the ball efficiently on the ground. really in these last few weeks. And Steve Sarkisian talked about that on Sunday, talked about how they had really made an emphasis in about the last month of really perfecting their outside zone reads and really being effective in that area. And I mean, it's shown up. So Kipp, is there something you've seen that has really impressed you, particularly since the first time Georgia and Texas played?
Yeah, definitely Trey Wisner. I mean, that Georgia game, they did a pretty good job stopping him. I think he only had like 3.5 yards to carry, 50 yards in that game since then. And the last 2 games, he's had over 150 yards a game. I mean, averaging like 6 yards a carry. So they have gotten him involved, and he's made some big plays, but they've also had big games from their other backs. Jarrett Gibson, didn't touch the ball against Georgia, but I had 16 for 100 and a touchdown against Florida. Jaden Blue against Arkansas and Kentucky had like 83 and 96 yards. So it's not just Trey. They've had big games from each of these 3 backs where, for the most part, Georgia shut them down in that aspect. So we talk about how important offensive balance is as far as staying unpredictable and how that allows your offensive coordinator just to, use the entire playbook, but also protects your quarterback. And that's exactly what these guys have been able to do. And that could definitely change if these guys are able to get the ground game going. I mean, the one big storyline from that first game was the fact that Georgia's defense terrorized the Texas quarterbacks. I mean, the photos, you saw Quinn, you saw Arch just both sitting on the bench. That was the photo from the first game. And trust me, they know it. And just like whenever Georgia loses a game and you see them play a different brand of football when they get a second opportunity, you've seen that against Auburn in the past. You've seen that against Alabama in the past. Well, now this Texas team might have a different identity when they play Georgia again. And if Georgia's not, that defense isn't able to pin its ears back against these Texas quarterbacks, there might be some struggles defensively. And so when Kirby says that they've changed too, you do have to argue, like, is Georgia a better football team now than they were when they played Texas? And I think just the improvement from Texas brings a little bit that more into question of which team is more poised to perform well in this football game.
Yeah, I think it sets up for a really interesting matchup, really on both sides of the ball with both of these teams. And I enjoyed looking through some of the photos from the original game. Ben got a great photo. I think it's Warren Brinson and someone else getting after Quinn Ewers, and Kipp talking about it right there just kind of triggered that memory of, just how they got after Quinn. Ben, what about you? What impresses you about where this Texas team is right now on the verge of playing Georgia and just what they've been able to do successfully lately?
Well, I think that it's not necessarily anything they're doing drastically better or different than what they were doing at the time that Georgia played them. But I think when you think of Texas and the skill players and Steve Sarkisian, like, you think offense, and don't get it twisted. I mean, they're still a very capable offense. This is the number 2 scoring defense in college football this season. And so I think that what has made this Texas team so dangerous is you have the offensive mind of Steve Sarkisian. You've got a quarterback in Quinn Ewers that can get the job done. You've got skill players at running back that you all have mentioned, obviously guys that they have gotten through high school recruiting in the portal at wide receiver. And so when you package that with a defense that just makes it really difficult on teams to score the football, you're giving yourself a great shot. I mean, you even go back to that Georgia-Texas game in Austin. Georgia moved the ball pretty well at times, especially early in the game, even with some of the first half turnovers. Georgia was, moving it down the field. Georgia was just having a lot of trouble getting the ball into the end zone. And so I think that that's been something that has been part of Texas's identity all year long. And I think when you look at this game, when Georgia gets its opportunities, when it gets into the red zone, you can't be struggling on these 3rd and short, 4th and short situations. You got to find a way to get that extra yard. Carson Beck throws the interception in the red zone that goes off of Lawson Lucky's hand on 3rd down. Like, those are opportunities that you are not going to have often against this Texas team, and you can't have self-inflicted wounds that prevent you from scoring touchdowns, because this is one of those games, even though Georgia's defense had its best performance of the year against Texas. This is one of those games where if you're settling for field goals too often, it's going to come back to bite you come the end of the game. And so I think, that's what stands out to me about Texas. This is one of the better offenses in the country this year.
I wanted to get to this Facebook comment. Right. I wanted to get to one of these Facebook comments. Blake Ivy, anyone heard an update on Trevor Etienne? Kirby talked about that on Sunday. His quote was, quote, Trevor's a ways away. I still don't know because we haven't even seen those guys. He wasn't really close to playing last week, so I don't know that I don't know how that's going to play out. So we'll see what he's able to do this week. I mean, I think it's a big-time pain tolerant situation with a rib injury. So we will keep an eye on it and keep you posted at Dogs 24/7. Well, we talked about Texas and their defense, but a big topic of conversation on Monday was about the Georgia defense. Obviously played really, really well, especially affecting Quinn Ewers getting in the backfield in that win back in mid-October. But we've seen this defense sort of be Jekyll and Hyde, and Kirby was asked about that on Monday, sort of if he could identify exactly what was going on and what the issue is. That's what Kirby had to say.
I don't know that I can. I do know that when we execute well, we play well. We have great resiliency. But the trait that confounds you or bothers you is that when something goes wrong, like any explosive play or any penalty that extends a drive has almost been catastrophic. Like we can't stop anybody if that happens. And we have not overcome that well. What we have done is stop people when we've had to. Played well in the red area. For a while there, we played really well at third down. But you can't put a finger on exactly what it was. If I could do that, then we'd certainly put a stop to it. But we've played well at times, and we've tackled well at times, and then we haven't at times. We've had more injuries than we've ever had in terms of guys in and out, but we don't use that as an excuse around here.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the way this defense plays on Saturday, especially against an opponent they've already faced, it's going to be a lot of the conversation. And I do think that Kirby made a really good point in that this defense at times has allowed situations that were bad to get worse in terms of giving up an explosive and then kind of getting caught up in that. And Malachi Starks was asked about that on Monday as well. And he sort of talked about communication and just trying to stay level-headed, moving on to the next play, which, honestly is easier said than done. But I think, Ben, this is what makes this defense so hard to watch sometimes is it is so kind of 180. You have a game where they impress you, the Texas game, a great example where you go, okay, they figured this thing out. They look more like that defense we saw against Clemson. And then we see situations like the week before that against Mississippi State, even UMass 2 weeks ago, where you're kind of shaking your head going, what in the world's going on?
Well, I mean, I think you're right about, and I think Kirby Smart sort of nailed it, where it's like there's things that this defense doesn't do well, and they've just consistently not done it well all year long. And then at the same time, when you need a stopper, they've got to do something, they do it. And I mean, you saw that in the Alabama game. I mean, the defense had to make basically every stop in the second half of that Alabama game until the one that they didn't make. And they did it. And you look at, the Georgia Tech game, perfect example. They could not make a stop on the first play of drives in that first half of the game. I think that Georgia Tech's first 3 drives all had 20-plus yard plays on the first play of the possession. And in many of those cases, like the first play of the game, that could have been bottled up for negative yards, and it ends up going for like 40 or something like that. And it's like, you see that type of thing happen enough. It's like, okay, it's no longer fluke plays. It's like, that's just part of who this defense is. But then, Smile Munning gets called for a defensive pass interference penalty in the 6th overtime or whatever overtime it was. And all of a sudden Georgia Tech needs 1.5 yards and they run the ball and Georgia stops them in that 1 yard, that 1.5 yards that they had to make a stop. They make the stop. So it is a weird thing with this defense that you could say the same thing about the offense. Like, it feels like until the back is fully against the wall, they don't become the true Georgia that we think that they can be. But it feels like any time that they're there, except for arguably, that second half against Ole Miss, every time Georgia's been in that spot, offensively or defensively, they've found a way. And so I think what you keep asking yourself is there a world where this Georgia defense becomes who it can be for 70 snaps? I don't know the answer to that. I mean, I think that they've shown me enough to know individually and as a unit they can do it. That's what he said about the offense, the passing game all year long. It's like, yeah, you're turning the ball over too much, but we've seen them do it. We know they can do it. We know what the recipe looks like for them to do it, even within games that they've struggled. And so we know it's possible. Whether or not they can string it together now for 4 or 5 games and win a natty, I think that's the part that I'm probably less confident in, just given how many flaws that there have been throughout the year.
You kind of hit on what I remember writing. I think it was before this Texas game, of like, this defense especially is sort of like the kid in class that you're just like, if you would just apply yourself, you could really, you could be all A's, you could do it, and you just continue to have things get in your way. Kipp, what do you make of just this defense and the fact that it is so, all over the place when it comes to putting good games together and then having other games where it just sort of looks like they're lost?
Yeah, you just sounded like me trying to parent. It's not easy, folks. I don't recommend it for anyone, but at this point, I think that this is kind of where Georgia's defense is, to where they're in that bend but don't break aspect, to where they'd rather just force opposing quarterbacks to 8 and 10 yard them down the field, focus on keeping the play in front of them, focus on not giving up those explosives. At the end of the day, I think this team's going to go as far as its offense can take them. We've established that if we're looking at the floor of both sides of the ball, but then also the ceiling, I do think that this is a team led by its offense. So for the defense, it's about putting them in good situations, not asking them to already be defending in the red zone at the beginning of possession, not turning the ball over, extending drives so that this time of possession, I think Georgia Tech was doubling Georgia for most of that last game. You're asking a lot of your defense. Those guys played well over 100 snaps or 100 snaps on defense. But it was the time of possession for this year has kind of gone the other way. Georgia was like one of the best teams in the country. It was well over 30 minutes a game. Now they're kind of teetering right at the 30-minute mark, I think, which is probably around 65, 70 overall. It's just you're putting a lot more pressure on your defense with those, added possessions and not being able to sustain drives. Fortunately for this defense, Georgia's stopped turning the ball over the last couple of games. And that's really, if we're going to go back to what Kirby said, that they aren't the same team they were against Texas, and I can flip it instead of making this, Georgia doesn't have a chance. Georgia doesn't turn the ball over against Texas. They're going to be in great position to not only have a competitive game, but really put it on them. So I think that's the aspect. If this offense doesn't turn the ball over, the defense is going to be in situations where Texas is having to force the ball a little bit. They can force some turnovers. And that's really where this defense has a chance to step up and play better than it has at times this season, is forcing turnovers and giving its offense back the football, because it might allow 300, 350 yards of offense on Saturday. But if they force 3 turnovers, I think we're talking about a Georgia team that probably played pretty well and probably came out on top.
David Cook on Facebook hits what I think is kind of our sentiment right now. The Dogs can win it all. They can also get knocked out early. And that sounds like you're kind of covering all bases. But, yeah, it's like who shows up and how do they play, especially depending on what matchup they draw once we talk about the college football playoff. I want to get into some of the things that Carson Beck had to say. It's rare that we get him on a Monday to start the week, but that's what you get when you are the number 7 team getting ready to play the number 3 team in the SEC title game. A lot of buzz getting ready for this game. Carson was asked, about that first game against Texas. He throws 3 interceptions. What did he learn from that experience? And where does he feel like he's improved since that game as he gets ready to play Texas again? So what Carson had to say.
Yeah, I think you go back and you watch that game, and there's just some situations where maybe I was trying to force the ball when it didn't need to, and maybe trying to make plays when they weren't there. And I think that's one thing that I've really improved on as, we've gotten into this kind of later half of the season, is not trying to do too much and just playing within myself and playing within the offense. Knowing when to try to make a play and knowing when to just chalk it up and, move on to the next one. There's 3 downs to get a first down for a reason. You don't have to try to get it all in one play. And, I think I've done a better job at that in the second half of the season.
I think Carson hit the nail on the head, and I think when we talk about the frustrations with Carson, that was so much of it, was that it felt like he was forcing throws, where it felt like he was trying to make something happen immediately when, even to his point, one of the big complaints that Kirby Smart had when we would come out of these games and he would be asked about any struggles Carson had, it was like, throwing interceptions on first down, where it's like, just live to fight another down. I think Carson realized that. I think that Texas game and then the Florida game that followed 2 weeks later were kind of the like, okay, it's time to get this thing cleaned up. It's time to play better football. And he's done that. He's played turnover-free football these last few weeks. Ben, what did you think of Carson's answer there as far as what he took from that Texas game and just what we've seen from Carson in these last few weeks?
Well, honestly, what I take from that probably has less to do with like what specifically he said and just more that like the fact that we ever were having a conversation, not even we seriously were having a conversation, but that there was a true dialogue mid-season that anybody other than Carson Beck needed to be Georgia's quarterback is like, we're going to look back at that in history and laugh at ourselves that was even something we would have even entertained as a conversation point. I don't think we did it too much, but the fact that there were multiple threads on the Junkyard suggesting that, and then you watch him, talk this week ahead of Texas, and you watch what he's done the last 3 weeks of the year, and I feel like he's playing some of his best football since he's been at Georgia over the last 3 weeks. That's what I take away when I listen to Carson talk about some of these things up at the podium. I know that he was not one of the media representatives for a few weeks there while he was probably working through some things on the football field. But once you kind of get through that, it's very obvious why Carson Beck is the guy that Georgia's relying on to throw the ball 40 plus times a game on a regular basis.
I always enjoy hearing from Carson. He usually gives you really good perspective, and he mostly shoots you straight. Kipp, what do you make of just what Carson said there and what he's been able to do lately? I knew it. You're muted. I knew it was going to happen.
Carson made me chuckle today because he had these back-to-back comments that kind of went against each other. You got asked about just watching other quarterbacks play and how he doesn't do it because he goes crazy trying to analyze everything they're doing. But then in the very next quote is like, I don't really get too down, or I don't really, everyone looks at me to not show any emotion because I don't get frustrated with how the game is going. So I'm just like, every other quarterback drives him nuts, but at his own level of play, he doesn't get frustrated with. It's just kind of an interesting dynamic on how other people's, adversities might not affect you, but your own. I'm the opposite. Like I see somebody else going through something, I'm like, oh, that's easy. You just got to do this and this. Myself, it's like making my cup of coffee in the morning. I'm like, can I not knock this over and just send boiling hot water all over the kitchen? That's like the adversity that I'm, trying to overcome on a daily basis. So it is easy to forget, all that he is being asked to do for this offense. And then you remember in that 8th overtime when they line up and Nate Frazier, just runs into the end zone and Kirby says, Carson switched us just into that play and allowed us to win. And thankfully he did. Basically, they're asking him to do that every single play is to make sure that they're not going to be put in a bad situation. And while Georgia's offense has been inconsistent, what have we seen? Like I said, the last 3 games, we've seen the Carson Beck that you saw almost all of last season, the Carson Beck that you expected to kind of see this season, but you forgot that Georgia's schedule was just out of this world. And they were playing teams that were, really pushing them to the limit on a weekly basis. So you saw, some of the struggles he had whenever Georgia's inconsistencies caught up to him. But now you're seeing what he's capable of. Now that you have an offensive line that's able to play consistently, You know what you have in your receiving core, and the freshmen and walk-on running backs. You know what they're going to bring to the table. So now that Carson knows what he has, he's able to kind of go through and process everything and put Georgia in a situation to be able to win football games. And I just think that aspect of Carson Beck's journey probably isn't getting talked about enough.
We will talk more about Georgia, Texas on Thursday. We'll have Horns 24/7's Eric Henry on, thinking probably 11 a.m. Eastern. We haven't solidified a time there. But before we turn the page from talking Georgia, Texas, I did want to get y'all's thoughts and specifically what you guys will be watching for on Saturday. And I'll start and say that I want to watch what this defensive line does, not only because they did such a good job as far as getting after Quinn Ewers in that first meeting. But now I think the big key is trying to stop Wisner in this run game. And it's not going to be easy with, based on what we've heard and based on what we've seen, I don't know that Christian Miller is going to be able to go in this game. And I think that's a significant loss. I mean, you had more of Warren Brinson, who I do think played really well against Georgia Tech. You saw some more of Xavier McLeod, who's still a young guy who would be going up against some really good offensive linemen. So I'm looking at Georgia's defensive line. I don't anticipate that defensive front can replicate what they did, 10 tackles for loss, 7 sacks in Austin. But you've got to be good, at least making Quinn Ewers uncomfortable and certainly trying to slow down Wisner in that run game. I'll throw it to you, Kipp. What are you watching for in this matchup? What do you want to see? And you're paying specific attention to on Saturday?
Georgia's run game. That last game featured Trevor Etienne rushing for 87 yards and 3 touchdowns. Well, he's doing everything he can to get back out there. And I do think there's a chance that maybe he can give it a go for 5 to 10 snaps. But you're looking at probably a guy that's going to be just in motion pre-snap, decoy, maybe a pass play or two. They're not going to ask him to be out there in pass pro or probably early downs. This is just me guessing here. So guess what? Now it's Nate Frazier and Cash Jones. You're going to have to step up and increase roles in a huge football game. And, Nate's had some big games. He obviously just had a huge moment. But there was a large stretch of even that last game where, Nate Frazier wasn't in the ball game and wasn't getting snaps. And I think that this game, they're probably not going to have a choice. They're going to have to go out there and try to continue finding success running the football. I do think, again, you saw Roderick Robinson come back. We saw that kind of early in the year with Branson Robinson coming back from a major injury, trying to get back up to speed. We'll see what he's able to provide. But I think having Tate Ravage back, and being able to play is also huge because if I remember correctly, he missed that game against Texas as well. So you have a different offensive line look with Monroe Freeling and Tate Ravage. But now you do have even Monroe Freeling, I believe, is a little banged up. So the rotation of the offensive line and how well they're able to really get things going in the run game, I think is going to dictate if this offense is able to continue having the success it's had in recent games.
I believe Kirby said after that Georgia Tech game that Monroe had missed some practice. So, yeah, I don't think he's 100% either. Ben, what about you? What's the aspect of this game that you're really going to be paying attention to on Saturday?
Well, it probably goes back to what sticks out to me about Texas, and I think Kipp touched on it a little bit, is just how does Georgia manufacture offense? Like he said, I feel like Trevor Etienne was the offensive player of the game in that Texas win. And so you're not going, whether he plays a little bit or not, you're not going to have that version of Trevor Etienne for that game, for the SEC championship game. And so what answers does Georgia have? I mean, Nate Frazier is getting more and more comfortable by the week, but this is still a Carson Beck led team. I mean, I'm thinking this is a game that he's going to throw it 40 plus times. They're going to get him in, and we say it all the time, the extension of the run types of plays, those types of things, they're just going to count towards the total. So that's going to get it up there as well. I just think you're going to see a lot more of that in this game because I think traditional run game, Georgia didn't have a ton of success with it in Austin. And I think if it wasn't for Trevor Etienne just finding some space and some tight spots, I don't know how much Georgia would have had. I don't think it would have even looked as good as it did, which wasn't fantastic. So I think for me, it's where do you find answers? And, it's weird coming off a game against Georgia Tech where the wide receivers had some of the more costly drops that they've had all season long. but they also had some of the more, I mean, the touchdown that Dominic Lovett had in the middle of the end zone where he's falling away and diving back and landing on his back and making that catch. Pretty meaningful play and pretty unbelievable catch. So I want to see this wide receiver group finally put it together without all of the just careless drops, because I do think, as much criticism as this group has gotten, if they can just eliminate those for some of these key games, they sort of goes back to what we talked about with this Georgia defense and with Carson Beck. It's like, when they're not dropping the ball, there are plenty of examples of Arian Smith and Dom Lovett and Dylan Bell doing productive things for this offense. When they have those costly drops, it puts Georgia in some really bad situational football spots. And that happened as bad as it's ever happened, really, on Saturday or Friday against Georgia Tech.
Yeah, Carson Beck and Kirby Smart both talked about those drops. Georgia now with 36 on the season, which is not only a FBS high, that's 12 more than the second most of SEC teams, which would be Ole Miss. So pretty significant. But, they voiced their support of those guys, said, we trust those guys. But, I mean, again, this to me is the area where you watch, and when we talk about how far this team can go, for me, guys, it's the receivers that are the biggest to me, where I say, yeah, this team can win a national title, but if you are starting slow and having drops early in games and you're trying to claw your way back, all due respect to Georgia Tech, a team like an Oregon or a team, these teams that Georgia could face if they make a playoff run, it's going to be a hell of a lot harder to get over things like drops and try to claw your way back if you're doing that against some of the best teams in the country. We're going to take a quick break. Before we do that, I do want to plug the final day of our Black Friday sale. If you are watching this live on Monday at midnight Eastern time, the sale is over, 75% off. I think a lot of folks have taken advantage of this deal. I highly encourage you guys to do so. A great opportunity during the busiest week of the season and ahead of what's going to be some busy weeks in terms of recruiting, as well as the transfer portal and this playoff run. I've got you covered on the team side. Kipp and Ben have got you covered on the recruiting side, getting all the intel as Georgia chases the number one class in the country and continues to chase after its third national title in 4 years. So again, go to dogs247.com, sign up today, 75% off. Do it before midnight. I think that is well worth the price of admission over there on the Junkyard. So we'll take a quick break, come back. We'll talk real briefly about the win over Georgia Tech. We'll talk about recruiting with signing day just a few days away, talk about the playoff, and then talk about UGA hoops. I want to give Ben credit as well as Kipp from Friday night, trying to make sense of what we saw between the hedges. But I wanted to circle back on that really briefly. Georgia winning that game 44-42. Just kind of get y'all's final thoughts from what we saw. I'll start off. I had a chance to rewatch the game on Sunday. Again, it's funny knowing that Georgia comes back in this game. You just see as that game's going and you just keep going, how does Georgia get back? And how is this even possible? And there's just these little plays along the way that when you watch it back, knowing how the game ends, really stand out. I mean, obviously the Dan Jackson forced fumble, but Cash Jones had some really big third down conversions over the course of that game. Carson Beck making some big plays along the way. Oscar Delp's touchdown to get the thing started. I thought that those guys, made the plays that Georgia had to have. Defense, I thought that the inside linebackers were really vulnerable against the pass, and I thought Haynes King did a really good job of attacking those guys. At the same time, I thought C.J. Allen was fantastic in the fourth quarter, and all those overtime sessions made some big plays. It's one of those things where I wrote about it after the fact. You point to what was wrong, you point to the mistakes they made, you point to, Georgia just barely getting enough breaks to win this game, but you do have to tip your cap to the resiliency and the team not panicking when, when Haynes King, when they scored that touchdown with, I think, like 7 minutes left to make it 27-13. I mean, I think Ben and I were up there saying, well, okay, I mean, that's it. Like, this offense is not going to score 2 touchdowns and then get the stops it needs to come back. And credit to both units of the football, both sides of the ball. They made the plays they had to have and then found a way to win it in overtime. Just crazy, but you tip your cap to Georgia for not panicking and making the plays they had to have. Ben, what stays with you from that win over Georgia Tech? Anything that sort of stuck with you in the days since?
I don't know that my thoughts are any clearer now than they were when I was trying to make sense of it immediately after the game. I'm not sure that my thoughts on it will ever be entirely clear. I've watched obviously live, and then I went back and watched it twice. I still don't understand how Georgia won that football game. There were maybe 7 different moments in that game where I think you could look up and be like, I just don't see the path that Georgia has here. And that went as far as like 2:08 to go, and they're snapping the ball on 3rd and 1. And I'm sitting there saying, there's no way Haynes King doesn't pick up this 1 yard and the game's over. It sounds cliche. Kirby Smart has said it dating back to last year about really since Carson Beck's been the quarterback of this team, that this team knows how to take a punch and give a punch, and that he's probably overused the word resiliency, except for at this point, I don't know that you can say that he's overused it, because this team wins games in more impossible situations than you would ever think, or even games they don't win, games that you would think are completely over, they make competitive in situations that you would just never imagine. I mean, this is a team, like if you tell me at the beginning of the year that Georgia's down 30-7 at half against Alabama, 10-0 early in the first quarter against Tennessee, 17-0 at halftime against Georgia Tech. I'm sure that there are some other examples, obviously down at halftime against Florida as well. I would have just said, yeah, I don't think that this Georgia football team was a playoff caliber team, and the gauntlet of the schedule that they were handed just got the best of them throughout the year. But somehow, despite being the most, and maybe being battle tested helps you, but being the most tested team this whole year long and being in some of the more strenuous schedule spots that I think that anybody's had this year, for them to pull out some of these gritty wins when you think that it's all lost tells you a lot about this football team. And when you get to this time of year and you're going to be playing teams that might take it to you for a quarter, they might take it to you for 2 quarters, but you just got to find a way here or there in the second half, in the fourth quarter, in the overtime, 8 overtimes, whatever it takes. This Georgia football team seems to find a way, and I think that's going to make for a fun December.
Still trying to figure out why Georgia Tech didn't go for 2 after the first overtime with a chance to walk it off, but that's something Brent Key's going to have to live with. Ben, you got thoughts there?
Well, I mean, the counterpoint, I guess, to that would be Georgia and Georgia Tech started that game out over 7 on 2-point tries. So the theory that everybody averages over 50% on 2-point tries, I feel like was a little misguided in that one, because I didn't think for a minute there, I didn't think anybody was ever going to get a 2-point conversion in that game.
Yeah, I don't know. They may have sent Alabama to the SEC title game if Georgia and Georgia Tech just kept going, but thank God that did not happen. Kipp, what about you? What has still stuck with you a few days removed from Friday's win?
How Kirby got out of the fact that he went for 2 with 9 minutes to go in the third quarter, and you know what? How that kind of saved him, because clearly that play didn't work. Everyone kind of joked that was Bobo's only 2-point conversion play, which we didn't find out. He had a whole set of them that he got to use out there. But had they used that, in overtime, they may not have won. I think they ended up they went 2 for 7 overall on the day on 2-point conversion tries. So, yeah, I mean, I was trying to find the charts on when to go for 2, and I found like a really old one that did say when you're down 11 to go for 2. And then I found a 538 thing of saying when to go for 2 and how it increases your estimated chance of winning. Like it almost doubles it just going for 2. I think the situation is that when you're down that much, that early in the game, you're assuming the opposing offense is just going to score multiple times, and you need to start trying to steal points because you're not going to be able to stop them. That's where I think the statistics is coming from, but it was still just completely ridiculous that they went for 2 that early. I mean, like, I can't believe it. And to the going for 2 in the first overtime, like, everyone always says you're supposed to do that because that's your chance to go ahead and win it there. No one ever actually does it. I think it's just what we want to see. Like, we want to see a team just take that risk. And then when they don't get it, which is what we saw these two teams do over and over again, in that situation, everyone will be calling for that coach's head. But everyone always wants them to go for 2 on that overtime, that first one, just to kind of go ahead and knock it out. But I don't like how many times do coaches actually do that? It doesn't seem like it's very often. So I just don't think any coach wants to be that guy. But to your earlier point, the thing that did kind of stand out to me is CJ Allen turned it to another gear and played the best football of his career. So if we're kind of looking for something for, that might be a turning point, because he had some up and down play this season, which was kind of a big deal with Georgia's defense, especially when Small London was hurt. But having him play that kind of football for 4 quarters and having Small London out there, that could unlock an aspect of this Georgia defense that we haven't seen before, if he can kind of channel that, because he was playing like a man on a mission. I get it, that's a different situation in overtimes and 2-point shootouts, but the man played some really strong football, and that's a position at Georgia where everyone takes a lot of pride in having elite inside linebackers. That looked like elite inside linebacker play, so we'll see if that carries over.
Again, I will plug the rewatch story that I will have out on Tuesday, going back to that Georgia Tech game and trying to really hone in on what all went down and what Georgia did in order to win that game. Well, Ben, as hard as it is to believe, we're just a couple days removed, or I should say a couple days away from National Signing Day. It looks like it's going to be a busy one for Georgia. Just with where we are right now, what are you watching closely over these next 2 days? What are the players of interest or the points of interest that you think fans should keep an eye on as Georgia gets ready to lock down this 2025 class?
Yeah, I mean, this is the final conversations. It's the dead period is what they call this period of time right here, which is a hilarious way to describe the most chaotic time in college football recruiting. Dead period doesn't mean you can't communicate with recruits. It just means you can't see them in person. You can't go see them. They can't come see you. And so what that means is, the 5 stars and 4 stars that Georgia is trying to flip or sign if they're uncommitted, they're hearing from Georgia coaches all day, every day from now until Wednesday, or in some cases Friday when Justice Terry is making his decision. And so for me, my biggest focus is on the defensive side of the ball. As you've already said on this show, we've got a great special run-in for the rest of today. So if you're listening to this right now, there is really no better time than the next 6 hours to jump on to Dogs 24/7, because we're going to have signing day and portal and SEC championship and college football playoff and, everything else beyond that for the next year. If you jump on now, we're going to have a lot of recruiting things that shake out between this episode and when we talk on Wednesday, and we're hoping to have a pretty cool signing day show as well. And so there's a lot of things that I'm not going to have the knowledge to talk about here that I will on our board over the next 24, 36, 48 hours. That said, my focus is on the defensive side of the ball. I think defensive line is a position group that Georgia definitely wants to add some pieces here late. The 3 guys that you look at as the primary targets: 5-star defensive lineman Justice Terry. He's uncommitted, previously committed to Georgia, previously committed to USC. Right now looking at Georgia, Auburn, Texas, and I'll throw Alabama in there as well, just because I know they're doing some interesting things late with some other prospects as well. You look at 2 guys committed to other programs in the state of Florida: Jeremiah McLeod, a defensive lineman from Lee County that's committed to Florida. You've got Kevin Wynn, a defensive lineman from Greene County that's committed to Florida State. My gut tells me that Georgia's going to find a way to sign 2 out of those 3 guys. And I think that there are different scenarios where it's a different variation of those guys. I think that Justice Terry is the one where you want to land him, and then, you figure it out probably with the other 2. At linebacker, Georgia's trying to flip some guys. Tavion Wallace committed to Arkansas. Christian Gass committed to Tennessee. I do not project at this exact moment in time, but again, if you're subscribed to Dogs 24/7, you might hear this 8 hours from when I'm saying it in real life, and you're now seeing something different on the board. So that's why you got to stay tapped into this all day, every day for the next, week, or for the rest of this week at least. But I think that Georgia has a chance with one of those two guys, but I would not probably favor it right now. And then in the defensive backfield, Georgia has, they would like to make a splash addition at defensive back. Lagonza Hayward just decommitted from Tennessee on Sunday. DJ Pickett has visited Georgia this fall, still committed to LSU. Dijon Lee still visited Georgia this fall, still committed to Alabama. That's another position group where I'm not necessarily expecting Georgia to get one of those guys right now, but ongoing communication is definitely happening there. If for whatever reason, out of that group of guys that I just listed, a high enough number of them don't end up committing to Georgia, it's possible that a spot could open up on the offensive side for an offensive lineman, for potentially a running back. As we know, Georgia hosted 2 running backs on official visits this fall. Anthony Rogers from the state of Alabama, Jamarian Morrow from the state of Tennessee. I know I've said a lot of names now of guys that I'm not expecting to end up at Georgia. But again, that's sort of what happens when you have 28 commitments in the number 1 class at this date. Spots are tight. If you're adding too many guys, it probably means there might be a name or two within your own class that's exiting as well. So, there's always going to be good news that comes with bad news this time of year, just because that's the nature of the business when spots are getting tight like this late.
Definitely. And as Ben said, stay glued to Dogs 24/7 these next few days, because, again, these situations change in a hurry. But Ben has got a finger on the pulse as far as what's going on. And then, again, to plug what Ben said, keep an eye out on Wednesday. We are hoping to have a signing day extravaganza, videos and podcasts on our YouTube and also in our podcast feed.
I will add, just as a teaser for a content item that I'll have on Tuesday night, I will have my final mock class, which is going to be me gathering as much intel tonight and throughout the day tomorrow as I can to try and give you the best picture of here's who I think Georgia is going to sign over the 3-day signing period. Like Jordan mentioned, I don't want to guarantee any specific guests that we're going to have on Wednesday, but I think that we're going to be able to have, we're going to be able to talk about this signing class. And I think that we might be able to bring on some of the signees that signed with Georgia and talk with them a little bit as well. So I'm hoping that we're able to have a fun show, and we'll give you a better idea of who those folks might be as we get closer to Wednesday night.
And if you subscribe before then, maybe you'll see it on the board first.
That'll be absolutely.
Nice little incentive to come on and join us on the Junkyard. Well, guys, let's turn our attention to what's going to be the penultimate college football playoff ranking. That's going to come out on Tuesday night. We do expect to see some changes toward the top. Number 2, Ohio State loss. Number 6, Miami loss. Shout out Fran Brown. 9-3 Syracuse. Fran Brown deserves a ton of credit there. But Georgia came into this week number 7. And it looks like they'll have a chance to move up. Kipp, what are you watching for? What do you expect to see as far as where Georgia is in the final playoff ranking before the SEC title game?
Yeah, I mean, they've moved up a smaller amount than what we projected every single week. So if I said I think they're going to be 5th, you can rest assume that they're not going to be 5th in tonight's ranking. But I think ultimately – You kind of want to see what's going on, not just with Georgia, but on the back end, because right now everyone's jockeying for positioning. You're seeing head football coaches out there trying to make their case. I mean, Lane Kiffin is making it very clear where he thinks Ole Miss, Alabama, and South Carolina should be. And I think that's kind of what you're looking at right now is those teams are battling these conference championship games. If there's an upset and SMU does not win, then that's going to affect their chances as well. And then like with Indiana in there, I think Georgia, we kind of know, if they win in Atlanta, they should be probably the 2 seed. If they lose in Atlanta, it should be the 7 seed, I would imagine. And what really is kind of, I guess, if I'm going to say this system does not work, it'll be if Georgia, let's say they lose in Atlanta, they're the 7 seed. Let's say they host Indiana, they host Indiana, but then they have to play Texas in the second round. playing Texas 3 times in the season is ridiculous. And I think that, that would just be kind of an unfortunate situation for Georgia. And just overall, you're trying to show that this expanded playoff, provides a superior format for postseason football. I think that's a clear situation where it would just be bad for all parties involved. So I think it could still work out to where even if they lose, end up playing a team like Penn State in the second round. But it's definitely right now, the fact that you're in Atlanta, you have an opportunity to provide yourself with a much better situation. And if they win Atlanta, they're probably playing like Notre Dame in the second round would be my guess. That would be just a huge win for Georgia fans and probably for Georgia as well.
I would totally agree if that's how things play out. Ben, what do you expect to see for Georgia in this penultimate ranking? And then I'm going to kind of throw you a curve too. And you got Alabama, Ole Miss, South Carolina in sort of a log jam there toward the end of that playoff bubble. What do you make of Alabama, Ole Miss, South Carolina? Where would you kind of have them as we go in to these rankings?
Well, I think as it relates to Georgia, like much of the top of the rankings right now, I think it's pretty straightforward. I mean, Oregon's going to stay at 1. Ohio State's going to drop out. Texas is going to move up to 2. Penn State's going to move up to 3. I would think Notre Dame would move up to 4 and Georgia would move up to 5. That would drop Ohio State and Miami behind them. I think that Tennessee would scoot up right behind Georgia at number 6, probably SMU and Indiana behind that. I'll be intrigued to see what they do with Ohio State and Tennessee and Indiana. I think that that's the first kind of like, what do you do with this group of teams, because that's going to probably determine home game versus away game in that first round matchup. I think Tennessee should be ranked ahead of Ohio State. That's just my personal opinion. I think you can make a resume case for Ohio State that's valid. Both of them have lost to teams that they shouldn't have lost to. Both of them have beaten, top playoff caliber teams, but Ohio State's loss technically looks better because it was to Oregon and Tennessee's was to Georgia. So that probably favors Ohio State a little bit there. But I think where they line up, I think that Tennessee will be ahead of Indiana. I think that Ohio State has a chance to be ahead of Tennessee. So I probably think that they would slot in right behind Tennessee. The committee's already shown this year that they're willing to have Ohio State with an extra loss to Indiana, but still be ranked over the top of them. So I think that they're going to do that again this time as well. Then you've got Boise behind them, and then you get to that spot that you're talking about, Jordan, and that's where I think it's Miami, Alabama, Ole Miss, and South Carolina. I think that South Carolina has a great case if you're looking at wins and how they're playing football right now and all these things. Much like Georgia earlier in the year when Georgia lost to Alabama and Ole Miss and they slotted Georgia in right behind both of those two teams, I think that the committee is going to stick with that approach on this one. South Carolina is going to be behind Ole Miss and Alabama because it's very easy for them to say you lost to both of those teams. You have to be behind both of those teams. Now, that's a whole nother conversation that I think the committee needs to have where you are punished more for losing to teams that are going to be competitive teams in the playoff race that you're going to have resume debates with compared to losing to teams like Kentucky or Arkansas or Northern Illinois or all of the Oklahoma, Michigan, all this list of teams that are not good teams. But when you don't have to then go and have a resume debate with that specific team, you kind of just get the benefit of the doubt and it's just counted as a loss. So that is something that I think needs to be revisited in terms of how they view that specifically. I think just based on how the committee operates, it's going to come down to Alabama or Miami. I think that Alabama typically gets the Alabama kicker. I think that's how it usually works out. So that's where I see it going. I already complained earlier this year when they had Miami ranked in the middle of the Alabama, Ole Miss, Georgia, Tennessee cluster, which I felt like those teams should have been back to back, regardless if Miami was in front of them or right behind them. It didn't matter to me. But the fact that they split the difference and said, oh, we feel like Alabama's better, but the other teams aren't, makes me think that Miami is going to be ranked behind Alabama. And they're probably going to split the difference of putting Miami in between Alabama and Ole Miss and South Carolina so that they can say, well, we were really having an Alabama-Miami debate, not an Alabama Ole Miss, South Carolina debate. And so those two teams, and so what it's going to look like in the bracket tomorrow, based on what I think, is Miami would be first team out, effectively eliminated from playoffs. Alabama would be last team in, barring the Clemson SMU game, because I think that SMU is in no matter what. At 11-1, I think that SMU should be in over a 9-3 Alabama. I understand resume, records and those types of things, or strength of schedule, all that stuff. 11-1 and playing in a conference championship game, they're already going to be ranked ahead of 9-3 Alabama. Losing a game in a weekend that Alabama's not playing, they should not be able to drop below them. So I think that if you are Alabama or Miami and you're getting that last team in spot on Tuesday night, you're the biggest SMU fans in the world, because if Clemson wins, they take the bye and SMU drops down to that 9-11 spot, and it gets interesting. But I can already tell you tomorrow night is going to be ugly online. People arguing about why Alabama or why Miami, and whoever is on the short end of that stick whether it's Miami or Alabama, whoever it is that's on that first team out spot is eliminated from the playoff. There's not going to be anything that they're going to be able to do to get in, by my estimation.
Hey, I'm going to have notifications on for my South Carolina guys too. I know they're going to be fired up with whatever happens. But yeah, I mean, what the playoff committee decides to do with these teams that lose the conference title game, they have to be very careful, because they're going to set a precedent. And I'll throw it back to you, Ben, but like, if you punish the losers of these games, all the conversation going from now until the next games are played are, why the hell are we having these conference title games in the first place?
Well, I think they have a great opportunity to make a precedented statement on that this year, because if Penn State or Oregon lose, they view this week, both of those teams are ranked higher than Notre Dame. I think a lot of people think that if Penn State loses, Notre Dame's going to just jump up and they're going to get the Notre Dame free number 5 spot. I don't see why that's the case. Like, to me, if Oregon and Penn State are ranked ahead of Notre Dame this week and they play each other, the loser of that game should be ranked ahead of Notre Dame coming out of that loss. That's just my view of the situation. I feel the same way about Texas. Like, if Georgia beats Texas, like, let's say Georgia beats Texas, I think that Notre Dame should drop down to the 7 seed, because that would mean that Georgia and whoever wins the Big Ten would have the byes, and whoever lost those 2 games would have been ranked ahead of Notre Dame going into championship week, and lost to teams that now have first round byes. So to me, you have the opportunity for the history of the 12 team, which might be very short lived. I have no idea how long the 12 team era is even going to be. But for the rest of the 12 team era, I think you can look at it and say, look, these championship weekend, we looked, and doing it with Notre Dame as the example, I think, is the best way to do it, because it's like, this is a team that does not play championship weekend. They cannot play championship weekend. And this is how we react to teams that lose to championship weekend compared to the biggest brand imaginable that doesn't play championship weekend. And so, I think this is the year where you set the record straight. This is how it's going to be. But I can't say for certain that that's the way that it's going to be, because it's Notre Dame. And we know that Notre Dame was very involved in the creation of this playoff.
Going to have the popcorn ready on Tuesday night to see what exactly happens. Georgia men's basketball minute. The Bulldogs are 7-1. They took care of Jacksonville 102-56. And a lot of people were like, this was a Georgia basketball team, and Jacksonville's not that good. Jacksonville beat Virginia Tech by 10 the week before. So pretty nice little win. And now Georgia has a 48-point win and a 46-point win during non-conference play. That is nothing to sneeze at. Georgia doing a good job. 27th in the initial net rankings. Obviously, we got a long way to go on this season, but they're going to get a big test on Tuesday night at 7 p.m. Going to host Notre Dame. This is a Notre Dame that lost one of its really talented guards due to injury. But this is a nice test for Georgia. Going to be breaking out some new red jerseys for this game. Really excited to see what Georgia does against Notre Dame. I think it's a game Georgia should win, but this is a nice measuring stick once again before they get a little bit of a break before next Saturday. They go to State Farm Arena and play Grand Canyon, which should be a really big game there in Atlanta. We're going to end the episode right there. I appreciate Kipp and Ben for popping on as always. Thanks to everyone who watched this live, everyone who is watching or listening to it after the fact. Again, a lot to plug. Wednesday, we will have a podcast and video for National Signing Day, hoping to have some really interesting guests and a lot of good content there. Again, if you're watching this or listening to this on Monday, our Black Friday sale ends at 11:59 p.m. Eastern time, so get in before midnight, 75% off. Cannot encourage you guys enough to do that, especially right now, because this is a super busy time of year. And then keep an eye out on Thursday. We will have our preview pod with Horns 24/7's Eric Henry. Eric popped on back in mid-October and helped us preview that game. Does a great job there for our Texas side. Super excited to have him on. So we will wrap it up right there. For Kipp Adams and Ben Wolk, I'm Jordan Hill. Until next time, take care, everybody.